In a previous program, we went to the northwest coast of the Dead Sea to Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were written. We're now going to travel about 50 k's, about 30 miles south, about 16 kilometres in fact south of En-Gedi, to another historic place situated 4 kilometres off the west shore of the Dead Sea, namely Masada. In biblical times, it belonged to the territory of the tribe of Judah, being about 30 kilometres, that's about 20 miles southeast of Hebron. In this map, you can see the Dead Sea and its peninsula. Masada is the Hebrew name for mountain fortress, and is a very appropriate name, for that is exactly what it was or is, as you can see in this picture. It was one of the world's most startling natural fortifications, actually. It's a majestic, high rocky tableland, having cliffs that rise about 427 metres, about 1,400 feet, and the top is seen by some as being shaped like a diamond or an anvil or a ship, because of the way that it tapers at both ends. The top is flat, measures about 560 metres, about 1,900 feet long, and averages almost 200 metres, that's about 650 feet wide, and it's 305 metres, about 1,000 feet wide in the middle. The total area of the top is about 9.3 hectares, about 23 acres. It's quite a vantage point. From its height, you can see traffic across the Dead Sea Peninsula. And regarding its history, the Jewish high priest and leader of the Maccabees, Jonathan, established the fortress as a retreat sometime during the Hasmonean revolt, which occurred during the 167-142 BC period. This is when it was named Masada. During that period, the Maccabees successfully fought for their independence from the kings who were ruling up in Syria at the time. The Jewish Maccabees not only won their independence from the occupying power of Syria, but they also conquered the Idumeans, that is the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, who lived in southern Judea. The Idumeans were compelled to be circumcised and embraced Judaism, the Jewish religion. But in 63 BC, the Romans came and conquered the Jews and gained control of Judea. They appointed an Idumean, Herod the Great, as king of Judea in 37 BC, and he reinforced the fortress of Masada, making it an impregnable stronghold for himself. He took 6 years, from 36 to 30 BC, to complete it, equipping it with huge water cisterns, grain storerooms, groves, gardens, barracks, arsenals, and defensive towers. He also built 2 splendid palaces with elaborate colonnades and frescoed walls, coloured mosaic floors, and a Roman-style bathhouse with hot, warm, and cold chambers. The fortress was designed to withstand a very long siege in the greatest of comfort. Herod built this wilderness retreat not for meditation, not for purification like the Essenes at Qumran, but to escape possible attack by Cleopatra of Egypt or by his Jewish subjects who hated him. Herod was paranoid about assassination, so he built himself a number of fortresses around the country as retreats for himself in the event of attack. As it turned out, Herod only used Masada as an occasional winter resort and a few vacation trips. All his life he lived in fear and killed anybody who he suspected might be a rival, even 2 of his own sons and the baby boys of Bethlehem born around the time of Jesus. One ancient author reports that the Emperor Augustus once said, quote, "I would rather be Herod's pig than Herod's son." Only the knowledge that Herod had Rome's protection stopped the Jews revolting against him, but he lived in fear of it all the time he was king, and so he built fortresses just in case. He actually ended up dying a natural death in Jericho in 4 BC at the age of 70. After his death, a Roman garrison was stationed at Masada. The occupation continued till 66 AD, when a large-scale Jewish revolt broke out all over the land. At this time, the Jewish zealots made a lightning raid on Masada, and they displaced the Romans, and they took the fortress over. As fighting continued throughout Palestine, many more zealots came to Masada and strengthened the Jewish garrison there, making a total of nearly 1,000. Jerusalem fell to the Romans under General Titus in AD 70, and the few surviving Jews who had evaded capture made their way across the Judean wilderness to Masada and joined the patriots in their determination to continue the battle for freedom. Residents of Qumran probably fled there too, after hiding their scrolls in the caves when they knew the Romans were heading in their direction. With Masada as their base for raiding operations, they harried the Romans for about 2 years. Masada represented the last and only outpost of Jewish freedom and independence in the land, and it has since achieved immortal fame as the last stronghold where the Jews made their last stand against the Romans. But in the autumn of AD 72, Flavius Silva, the Roman general, took his 10th legion and its auxiliary troops and thousands of Jewish prisoners of war who had to carry water from En-Gedi, timber and provisions, and he laid siege to Masada, then defended by Eleazar ben Jair, the leader of the Zealots. Silva was determined to crush this outpost of Jewish resistance. The Romans surrounded Masada at the base with a siege wall and 8 military camps, and proceeded to build up to the top a massive earthen and stone ramp on the west face to enable their forces to breach the defences. You've been looking at remains of the siege wall, some sections of which have been reconstructed. You can see the siege wall running around the base of the fortress, you see, running all the way around here. And 7 of the military camps are indicated there by the letters. You see them, A, B, C camps, D down here, E, F, and G up here. Those are the camps that the Romans set up around Masada. The Roman wall and camps are depicted in red in this particular diagram. So well are the campsites preserved that from the air or the edge of the Masada summit, they look today as though they'd just been abandoned. In this aerial picture, you can see the outline of the main camp down the down the main camp here. Another camp above it, you'll notice, and you can see the siege wall and the ramp there. The outline of the 3 camps on the eastern side, A, B, and C, on the diagram, are also clearly visible from the top of Masada, as you see here. As you can see, a depot has been built here, where the tourist buses bring the visitors in, who either walk up or catch the cable car. And this is where the cable car leaves from. And here's one ready to leave. The camps were quarters for the Roman troops, situated at possible escape routes from the mountain fortress. They also acted as a defence for the troops themselves against surprise raids by the Jews. The Jewish historian Josephus gives a full account of the siege wall, camps and ramp, etc. The siege wall, of course, was built around the base of the entire fortress to prevent the Jews from escaping it. It was over 3,500 metres, that's over 2 miles long, and its eastern section was almost 2 metres, about 6 feet thick, and fortified by 12 towers built at intervals of 70 to 90 metres. The ramp, seen again here, was not entirely man-made. According to a geological survey, there was a natural spur there consisting mostly of natural bedrock. The ramp was built on this by the Romans who wore body armour. They were protected by screens and sheds, and materials were brought up through covered passageways. The ramp is a tribute to their engineering skill and perseverance. It was 197 metres, about 640 feet long, and 75 metres, about 240 feet high, and had an incline of 20 degrees. Took 7 months to build, evidently. A lot of timber was used to contain and reinforce it, and pieces can be seen sticking out of it today. As for example, in that previous picture. Plenty of food was stored in the Masada fortress, so the Jewish defenders could not be starved out by the Romans. So they had to be stormed. The cliffs could never be scaled in force, so Silva, the Roman general, was compelled to build the ramp. When the ramp was built, an ironclad tower and battering ram were winched up to a stone platform at the top. The siege took place in the winter of 72-73 AD. Prior to building the ramp, the Romans, of course, built a 3 metre, that's 9 foot high stone wall around the Masada fortress and a wall around their camps, as you see in this closer picture here, in a semi-preserved state. Remnants of the stone wall are still visible today, and one of the items of interest to the tourists. As you see here, some of the walls have been reconstructed to give an idea of their original appearance. When the walls were built to prevent Jews from escaping from the mountain and to protect the Romans from attack at night, work started on the ramp. The Romans also built an ironclad mobile tower and battering ram, something like what you see here in this picture. The idea was to get it up the ramp against the wall on top of the mountain fortress and then pound its way through the wall. The Romans had many Jewish slaves to pull the tower, knowing that the Jewish defenders of the fortress would not fire upon them. Roman soldiers, of course, were inside the ironclad tower, and others followed behind, being protected by it and their own shields. Other Roman soldiers fired a barrage of arrows up at the Jewish defenders, who pelted the tower with rocks. Here's an artist's impression of the scene, with the tower at the top of the ramp, followed by soldiers and artillery. And here's another similar artist's impression. And this is a model of the scene at the Masada Museum, which thousands visit each year. Once the tower was up against the wall of the Masada fortress, hinged doors were lowered, acting as a platform for Roman soldiers to stand on and fire down on the Jews. The Jewish zealots knew, of course, why the Romans were building the ramp and on what section of the wall the battering ram would concentrate, so they took measures to counteract it. As this diagram here indicates, they built a wood and earth wall directly behind the outer wall at the point of attack. Point of attack is here, of course. This pliant wall would have had the effect of absorbing and dispersing the force of the ram's blows. To build it, they had to scavenge timber from the roofs of their buildings. This plan shows the area of attack by the Romans. It's marked by the words tower, as you see here, behind which the zealots' wood and earth wall is indicated along here. As you can see, it was just north of the Western Palace, about which more will be said later. The outer wall actually collapsed under the pounding of the battering ram, but the Romans were unable to breach it due to the earth and timber backing. So, in order to overcome this, the Romans rained fire upon the new wall, setting its wood ablaze. At this stage, the Jews realised they could no longer hold out against the Romans and would be defeated next day. So Eleazar made a speech in which he set forth the horrors of the fate that awaited them and begged them to kill themselves rather than surrender or fall into the hands of the Romans. Let our wives die before they are abused, and our children before they have tasted of slavery, he urged and exhorted, and so they all consented. Their religion prohibited suicide, so as Josephus records, he said the men with tears in their eyes embraced their wives and children, then with sword and dagger killed them. Collecting all their treasures in piles, they fed them to the flames and they burned their camp. Next, they chose 10 men by lot to slay the rest of the men. Then one of the 10, again chosen by lot, killed the remaining 9, and finally set fire to the palace, then fell on his own sword. In silence, so the enemy would suspect nothing, one of the most touching tragedies in human history took place, cheating the enemy of the full savour of victory. In a remarkable discovery, Yigal Yadin's excavation at Masada may have found the actual lots used in that final deadly lottery. Amid a vast accumulation of debris in one of the rooms, Yadin uncovered these 11 sherds, each inscribed with a different name and all written by the same hand. Although exceeding Josephus's figure by 1, the peculiar presence of a group of sherds with individually inscribed names strongly suggests that these were the lots used. The sherd, second from right in the middle row, is interesting. It bears the name of Ben-Yah. This undoubtedly refers to Eleazar Ben-Yah, the leader of the zealots at Masada, to whom Josephus assigns the speech advocating mass suicide as an alternative to surrender. In his book, Masada, Yadin, who you see here, was moved to write these words, quote, "If I were pressed to single out one discovery more spectacular than any other, I would point to this find, which may not be of the greatest importance from the point of view of pure archaeology, but which certainly, when we came upon it, electrified everyone in Masada who was engaged in the dig, professional archaeologist and lay volunteer alike. End of quote. The next day, April the 15th, 73 AD, when the Romans at last got into the fortress, they found alive only 2 women and 5 children who had concealed themselves, or maybe their husbands or fathers had concealed them, not being able to bring themselves to kill them. They alone lived to tell the tale. Besides them, the Romans found a mass of 960 dead bodies. Josephus says, quote, "When they discovered the numbers of the dead, the Romans did not rejoice at their enemies' downfall, but admired the noble decision and unwavering defiance of death of so many people." For many Israelis, this devotion to liberty is a national symbol called the spirit of Masada. Masada has today assumed an important symbolism for the Jews. Israeli army recruits swear their oath of allegiance here with the words, "Masada must not fall again." When the Romans' 10th Legion vandalized and left Masada and marched back to Jerusalem, a small guard remained at the fortress for some years, after which the desolate fortress deteriorated to even further ruin during the following 19 centuries. Byzantine monks settled there briefly during 400 to 500 AD, but except for that short interlude of occupation, the place was abandoned and deserted and left to the ravages of nature. The site was first identified in modern times by Edward Robinson in 1838 and was later visited and described by other explorers. Major interest, however, was focused on Masada in 1953 when Gutman traced the serpentine twistings of the snake path on the east, and you also see in this picture here, you can see the reference to the snake path, and also down here below it is the depot, and you see the road leading to it. Gutman located Herod's water system, established the general outline of the buildings, and led study groups of young people on strenuous cross-country hikes to Masada. He urged that large-scale excavation should be carried out on this important site. A careful archaeological survey was done in 1955-56 by a joint Israeli expedition consisting of various archaeologists and volunteer workers. This was followed by 3 large-scale seasons of excavations from 1963 to 1965 under the direction of Professor Yigal Yadin of Israel and sponsored by the Hebrew University, the Israel Exploration Society, and the Israeli Department of Antiquities and Museums. Notice in this picture on the left, down in the lower section, what appears to be 2 rows of openings or caves, 1 row above the other, referring to this area around here. Here we are closer to that place. A group of young volunteers climbed along this lower northern slope of the Great Rock to examine these holes, or caves as they appeared to be. They proved to be openings to huge square cisterns which had been dug out of the rock. And here we are inside one of those cisterns with a sunbeam streaming in through the hole below the ceiling through which the water poured to fill it. After the cisterns were cleaned out, it was estimated that each one had a capacity of up to 140,000 cubic feet. Together, the 12 cisterns could have held 1,400,000 cubic feet of water. If you're wondering how the diggers got in and out to get rid of the spoil, well, they dug steps down into each cistern. And in this picture, you can see the outline of them going up the side of the wall here. Here's a better picture of the steps standing in front of them, looking up to the entrance. The rails, of course, have been erected for tourists. On two small wadis, which pass to the south and the north of Masada, Herod constructed dams in two places, which diverted rainwater through open channels or aqueducts to the cisterns. And this picture points to some of the channels or aqueducts carved out of the cliff face. As you can see in this picture, there is a path which enables people to access the cisterns, which many of the tourists do. It doesn't rain very often in this area, but when it does, it can be quite torrential, causing flooding, even cutting Masada off from the rest of the country. On the screen at the moment, we have a picture of one of those rare occasions of it raining at Masada. It's only drizzling in this picture, but it can be torrential. This was one of the wadis which supplied water to the rock-hewn cisterns, and this is one of the few occasions in the year when it gushes with sudden torrents as a result of the storm. But of course, just one storm could provide thousands of litres of water. Here's another rare scene in the desert fortress: waterfalls at the end of the now broken canal, which originally filled up the cisterns. Water was carried from the cisterns in Herod's day by thousands of slaves and beasts of burden who carried the water up in jars along two paths from west and east, which ended by joining the snake path. The water was taken up to another set of cisterns at the top of the fortress. At Masada's most northern tip, at its highest point, and overhanging the very edge of the precipice, the excavators found King Herod's three-tiered royal vista. It was exactly as Josephus, the Jewish historian, described it almost 2,000 years ago. Herod's luxury palace enjoyed the coolest climate, the finest natural defence advantages, and the most commanding view of the surrounding countryside. The following pictures of a model give an idea of the original three-tiered royal villa. A glance at this aerial view on the screen shows immediately that the buildings were constructed in three tiers or terraces. Very clear, 1, 2, 3 down there. The top terrace is but an extension of the narrow section of the summit, and of course is the highest point on Masada, as you see here. And here's a group standing in that particular place. The building here served as Herod's living quarters and involved 4 spacious and highly decorated apartment rooms, several hallways, and a semicircular court balcony extended to the very edge of the cliff, as we're able to see in what remains of it. All rooms were paved with black and white mosaics and arranged in geometric patterns. The middle terrace is about 18 metres lower. You can see the remains of a circular structure there in this particular picture. It was a circular and roofed colonnaded pavilion designed for relaxation and leisurely enjoyment. The view from here is quite breathtaking. The lower terrace is 15 metres below the middle one and consisted of an elaborate apartment with its rooms and private bath built on a 16 metre or 54 foot square, surrounded by two series of columns that formed a double colonnade. The walls were of imitation marble, inlaid in places with precious stones. The magnificent frescoes which adorned the southern wall were so well painted that they've maintained their freshness throughout the past 2,000 years. Here, Herod could enjoy his leisure with his companions, refresh himself in the bathhouse, and then banquet and relax against the pillars and decorated walls while taking in the impressive view. The outside staircase that you see in this picture was actually built for the tourists. Originally, inner staircases, hidden and invisible, connected the three terraces. Very convenient, of course, for the tourists now to be able to walk around through these walkways that have been set up. It seems that the main reason for Herod choosing this location for his palace villa was climate. Masada has two climate problems: the sun that sears throughout most of the year and the raging south wind. The northern point of Masada, where Herod's palace villa was built, particularly the middle and bottom terraces, is the only site on Masada which is sheltered for most of the daylight hours. Sheltered from the sun so that it's cool and pleasant, and sheltered from the south wind. The rock walls of each terrace serve as windbreaks so that it's always still. In this picture, you see a powerful supporting wall, about 25 metres, about 80 feet high, which Herod's engineers built on the precipice underneath the lower terrace at the north end, as you'll see in the next picture. Here it is round here. The rock of Masada tapers to its narrowest point here, not more than a few metres wide. So in order to erect anything upon it at all, Herod's engineers had to fashion some kind of artificial platform with the aid of powerful supporting walls hanging over the abyss. As excavation progressed on this lower terrace, columns and frescoed panels at the base of the columns were uncovered, as you see here. The lower parts of the wall had been plastered and decorated with wall paintings, which have kept quite well during the past 2,000 years. This was mainly due to the dry climate and because they were covered by debris for centuries and not exposed to the elements or to vandals. They may not accord with our artistic taste today, but they represent the style that was widely popular throughout the Roman Empire in that particular era. Here's a close-up of the corner of the inner row of columns. The principal purpose of the artist was to give the lower part of the plastered walls the appearance of being panelled in stone and marble. This is how artists decorated the whole of the lower part of the outer as well as the inner wall, the two walls which encompassed a square enclosure. The artist's effort to produce a likeness to real marble tablets apparently succeeded because it convinced Josephus, who records that, quote, "The walls and floors of the edifices were paved with stones of several colours." The pillars fooled him too. He wrote that each one was made of a single stone, But in their state of disrepair, it was revealed that they were constructed of several drums of soft stone. They were plastered, then grooved, giving them the appearance of giant sculptured monolithic columns. They were crowned with Corinthian capitals, which also were painted. Such was the magnificent and decorative lower edifice, used for rest and relaxation, leisure and pleasure, a place from which one could enjoy the superb view northwards towards En-Gedi, and beyond, eastwards, across the Dead Sea to the sunrise and mountains of Moab, as you see here, and westward to the hills of Judea. Here, Herod could refresh himself with his companions in the small bathhouse, and then banquet and relax against the pillars and decorated walls while he sipped wine and took in the impressive view. The only area in the entire palace which served as the living quarters proper was the upper terrace, which consisted of two parts, the ruins of which you're looking at here. Its northern section was a large semicircular porch, which we have seen before on the model. It's talking about this area around here. This site commanded a breathtaking view, as you can imagine, of the north, east and west. Behind the semicircular porch were dwelling chambers, no more than 4, and several corridors. It was obviously not intended to house a large number of people. It had been built for Herod alone, or perhaps for himself and one of his 9 wives. This dwelling on the upper terrace was also ornately decorated, possibly more lavishly than the middle and bottom terraces. In some of the rooms, the mosaic floors were still in a reasonable state of preservation. In this picture, we see a section of white mosaic stones bearing a simple geometric pattern of hexagons in block stone. The walls and ceilings of the rooms were, of course, adorned with paintings, but the buildings on this top terrace had been looted and damaged by the successive conquerors and occupiers, the Zealots, Roman victors, Byzantine monks, earthquake, and the sands of time. Only here and there could undisturbed sections be found which testified to the original architectural embellishments. For example, as you see on the screen, a fragment of painted plaster which proves that the rooms of the upper terrace were decorated with frescoes. In and around the heaps of earth and rubble were discovered scores of pillar drums, as well as bases and capitals such as you see here. This showed that there were pillars on the upper terrace as well, and that they were not made of a single stone, but of several stone sections. The pillars were probably used to beautify the impressive semicircular balcony. This rather attractive Corinthian capital was found on the lower terrace of the palace vista. Such items help us to imagine the original glory of the palace on this mountain fortress. Since there was a number of columns and each consisted of several drums, the ancient masons and builders had to put a working mark on each drum so that it could be put in its proper place, fitting snugly between its neighbours when the assembly stage was reached. They would assign a letter to the column and a number to the drum. And on the screen, for example, is drum 1 of column T, marked by the Hebrew letter TET. Being Hebrew letters indicated the builders and stonemasons must have been Jewish. In addition to the 3-terraced palace villa, Herod also constructed a main official ceremonial administrative palace, the Palace of the King, as it was called, on the western side of Masada. You're looking at an aerial view here of the ruins. before excavation took place. Here it is today, since excavation. As you can see, it was situated right on the edge of the western side of the mountain above the Roman ramp. In this artist's impression, the Roman siege tower is at the top of the ramp overlooking the palace complex. You can see it there. The palace was the largest building, of course, on the summit, consisting of 4 wings, covering an area of almost 11,000 square metres. That's about 36,000 square feet. In it were the royal apartments, built around a large central court and a magnificently decorated reception hall leading into the throne room. There were administrative quarters, sumptuous apartments, guest rooms, luxurious bathrooms with tubs, a cold water pool, service rooms in which were a kitchen with huge cooking stoves large enough to take 10 to 12 pots at a time. The storeroom wing of the palace was 64 metres, about 210 feet long. 3 small, richly decorated palaces nearby probably housed members of the royal family. North of these were 2 rectangular buildings, apparently an administrative centre and the residence of high officials. As a result of excavation, this plan was made. The colours in the plan here indicate the various wings. The mauve section here, of course, the dwelling quarters and the throne room. Above that is the service wing up here, and the bottom red section here was the storerooms, and the white area in there is the administrative buildings. And during excavation of the Western Palace and other buildings in 1963-65, these workers uncovered the coloured mosaic floor in a corridor leading to a bathroom in the king's quarters. This one was found on a wall against which the zealots had built a simple oven. And this section of mosaic was found on the floor in the eastern side of the building in the king's quarters. Since discovering these mosaics, they have been, of course, cleaned up and are on display for the tourists. Not only were these the most ancient coloured mosaics ever discovered in the country, but also the most beautiful belonging to this particular period. It's interesting that Herod, even in his buildings at Masada, was reluctant to offend the religious convictions of his family and Jewish citizens. He did not, therefore, resort to representations of the human form or of animals in his mosaics, as was customary in his day. To the north of the Western Palace stands a well-preserved structure, a church, which you see here, which was always the first and most conspicuous ruin to catch the eye of visitors to Masada. You can, in this picture here, there it is there. Because of its plan, it was actually quite easy to identify. You can see it here. Yeah. It had, in fact, long been identified by scholars as a Christian church or chapel of the Byzantine period. In this picture, you see how the main hall of the chapel appeared at the beginning of the excavations, with the apse in the background looking east towards the Dead Sea. Here it is after excavation. The walls of the chapel are preserved to a considerable height and are covered with plaster bearing such original decoration as pottery sherds and small stones set in geometric patterns and floral designs. The main reward for the work on this site was found in a small chamber off the northern side of the hall. When the pile of debris had been removed down to floor level, the workers got a glimpse of part of a mosaic, and this picture was taken at the time, so you can see it down here. Unfortunately, the small stones making up the mosaic were not good quality and almost disintegrated at the touch of a hand. Great patience and skill were necessary for the whole floor to be uncovered without damage. Many, many days were spent doing this. When the work of clearance was completed, what lay revealed was a complete Byzantine mosaic floor, one of the most beautiful of those known of this period. Its design is a series of 16 round medallions, each containing designs of fruit and plants, such as pomegranates, figs, oranges, grapes, and an egg basket. From the style of the mosaic, the building could be dated to the 5th century AD. A small group of monks seeking remote retreats far from the cities, but preferably those which had buildings they could use, found Masada an ideal location. They dwelt in small cells scattered over the summit. Some actually lived in caves, as is suggested by crosses that were found painted on the walls in the caves. It's assumed they were forced to leave Masada with the Muslim conquest of the country at the beginning of the 7th century AD. Since then, Masada remained unoccupied. This plan also shows the position of a swimming pool just southeast of the palace, to the right of the palace in this picture. Here we are here. We'll have a look at that now. Here it is before excavation took place. At that stage, before work commenced, a large depression in the area was noticed, but the reason for it was not known at first. But after excavation and reconstruction, which required considerable effort, as you can imagine, it became apparent that this, in Herod's time, was some kind of swimming pool or public bath. It was a massive pool with plastered steps at one end, which made bathing possible with a minimum amount of water. You'll have noticed that all around the walls there are niches where clothes could be left during bathing around here. This swimming pool, like the other water installations built on arid Masada, cannot fail to arouse our respect for the skill, ingenuity and sheer physical labour invested by Herod and his engineers. In front of the northern palace villa, as shown on this plan, originally stood a large bathhouse with a commodious court where people might visit, philosophise, or just idle away their time. And here it is here. These are the ruins of the bathhouse before excavation, always visible to visitors to Masada in the past. But at first, no one knew it had been a bathhouse. All sorts of ideas had been suggested. But as excavation got underway, they uncovered the walls. They found that they were plastered. In the plaster were impressions of clay piping, visible on the walls in this picture. It was not difficult at that stage to guess that what they were clearing was the hot room, the coldarium, of a large bathhouse in the Roman style. As they dug deeper, they found that there were pipes of clay to carry the heat in all the walls. Among the debris, they also came across many such pipes, rectangular in cross-section. The decisive proof appeared when they'd excavated down to the fragment of a floor. Beneath it was another floor, and between the two they discovered more than 200 tiny pillars like those seen in this picture. Most of them were made of round clay bricks, which were beautifully preserved as customary found in the underground heating chamber of the hot room, that is, the firing area where the heat was produced. The walls were faced with perpendicular clay pipes which ran right to the bottom floor. Adjacent to the building was an oven from which the hot air issued into the space between the two floors of the hot room, and from there through the wall pipes into the hot room itself. The room was almost without any opening, and it was possible to heat it to high temperatures. Then, by pouring water on the hot floor, it became a steam bath. On this plan of the bathhouse, the hot room is C, which stands for caldarium. Adjoining this was the tepid room, referred to by T on the plan, which stands for tepidarium. And adjoining this was the cold room, indicated by the F, which signifies frigidarium, and the A stands for apoditarium, which was the entrance and disrobing room. This arrangement, both in its plan and technical details, was identical with that of other bathhouses of Herod's period discovered at Jericho and also at Herod's mountain fortress known as Herodium, which is about 12 kilometres south of Jerusalem, and you're looking at it in this picture. Masada's installation was also exactly like the handsome Roman bathhouses of Pompeii and Herculaneum. It was as fine a bath as could be found in the Roman Empire, a great thrill to the archaeologists. The floor of the bathroom court was paved in geometric design of alternating black and white tiles, identical to those in the upper terrace of the northern palace villa. Excavations revealed that in the first stage of building there was a mosaic floor which was later changed for this paved floor. Structural changes may have caused this, or the mosaic floor may have collapsed in an earthquake and later replaced by the paved floor. The entrance and disrobing room was large and lavishly built. It had wall paintings and a paved floor with black and white triangular tiles. The ceiling had also been decorated with paintings. Seen on the screen are fragments of the painted plaster ceiling which collapsed long ago and broke into pieces. Additional structural changes in the bathhouse were made after the capture of Masada by the Zealots, and further changes were made by the Roman garrison which occupied the site. This explains the various additions, particularly in the bathhouse. In the northeastern corner of the disrobing room, this small bathing pool you've been looking at was discovered. It had obviously been built later than the bathhouse, for not only did it stand on the original paving tiles, but its walls crudely covered part of the original wall paintings. They may have originally looked something like this. Well, at this particular point in the program, I'm going to stop. I didn't really want to do the whole program in one go. It can make it a bit low, so I'm going to stop at this point. and I'll give the second program maybe next Sunday, so that we don't sort of forget what we've already seen in this first program.